Hi, this is Riv or Spectriv, and in this video, I'll be covering FRAMEWALKER's production scope. So what were the limitations and how did we overcome them? So let's start with the limitations. The studio director wanted a streamlined process. There were 4 to 6 weeks of production time per episode. Initial Vision is also a startup, so considering the team, it's very small, you needed to focus on your roles and prioritize what can actually get done in that time frame. For some perspective, the art team was 3 people, so there were 2 on the animation team and 1 in motion graphics. Then all of the team members also worked together, so my role would lead into some parts of the writing and also some areas of motion graphics. Aside from this, as said in the structure segment of my website, FRAMEWALKER is also a story that is told in 2 parts. So story number 1, what happens on the screen, and story number 2, which is the continuation of story number 1, which happens in the background of everything. Please remember this for later. FRAMEWALKER is also someone who represents anyone, everyone, and we wanted to put him in familiar locations. We also need to have real-life images. So where do we get these? Also because we can't produce our own backgrounds in 4 to 6 weeks. That would take too much time and we need to focus on animation. So the solution: thinking in backgrounds, which basically means the background comes first and everything else follows. So how did we do it? Before art, the story still comes first. So the writer needed to create a first draft of where FRAMEWALKER wanted to go, what happens in story 1 and 2. Once the draft was there, it was up to us to decide on a real-life location that matched thematically with the script and what was going on there. We ended up going with New York Times Square, and the way we would source our backgrounds was to get from Google Maps and Google Earth. Basically, we had a rough draft to surround the background hunt around. And with that, it was time to start actually hunting for backgrounds. With such a wide range of options, I had to narrow down my focus. So these are the questions I considered, or my background checklist. Basically, my guide in selecting a scene. So 1 would be background cohesion, the flow and framing. 2 would be to think in 2 ways. A background that works for story number 1 and story number 2. And 3 accounts for environment interactivity, script diversion, and any necessary manual editing of the location. So let's dive into each of these. 1. Background cohesion. This relates to anything that has to do with composition, aesthetic, and the flow from scene to scene. So composition is visual appeal, how a scene is arranged. In photography, this is with leading lines, rule of thirds, symmetry, and other rules. For scene to scene, the flow of going from background to background, even if they aren't directly connected in real life, needs to appear so. It needs to be cohesive and make sense. With all these images at my disposal, how did I make sure these rules were followed? Well, for one, I had to study each map location closely. Being limited to New York Times Square, I checked every route and all the possible angles that were pleasing to the eye. Once I was done exploring a location, that is when I would collect 3 of the best options that fit a certain scene from the script. As for the flow, in going to the next scene's background, I'd always ask myself, does this look connected to the background of the first scene? Does transferring from the first scene to the next scene seem jarring in any way? Like FRAMEWALKER teleported from a beach to a desert? So to avoid any scenarios like this and not make the selection process too long either, once I had my 3 background choices per scene, then it was time to assemble them. I combined the most fitting scenes, in my opinion, into a cohesive route proposal from scene 1 to 12, just all backgrounds. Then, the golden 3, I also made 3 different route proposals for team discussion. Checklist number 2 was thinking in 2 ways. A scene's background needed to work for both story 1 and 2. Just as I had narrowed down the background choices per scene, I also narrowed down the actions that could take place within the scene. The team wanted to explore the route proposal options, so I couldn't get into storyboarding just yet. That being said, we still needed a visualizer and it would be best to account for what the possible blocking could be. There was a basis action in the script but then it could always change since FRAMEWALKER was just a silhouette, and the scripted action might not actually fit the background available. This considered, I narrowed down the actions to just 3 choices per scene as well. It was up to me to make sure that the action could fit in one sentence so it's easy to digest, and using Google Slides and communicating with the team, I would drag just a white silhouette PNG across the screen so people knew what the general blocking is. Now, the second part was making sure that the background also worked for story number 2. So once story number 1's needs were filled, story number 2 had to continue off its own story and there needed to be space for that in the background. My solution for this was blocking out spaces in each of the backgrounds in cyan, proposing to the motion graphic artist and the writer that these are places where the text for story number 2 can appear. And lastly, accounting for environment interactivity, script diversion, and manual editing. Something that was important to the studio director was how FRAMEWALKER would interact with his environment. Because while we didn't initially know the framing of any background, FRAMEWALKER could be anyone, but he's also an energetic, impulsive vlogger. It brings both his surroundings and himself to life if he interacted with what was around him. Now, if there were any diversions but we really wanted the general structure of the scene, I created my own version of the 20-80 rule or the Pareto principle. The original Pareto principle is about 80% of outcomes resulting from 20% of causes. But what if we just needed 80% of the scene to be fundamentally working, and if there was 20% of it that needed any changes, then it could manually be done. And examples of this are in scenes like the hot dog stand and the newspaper stand. These weren't in the original images. So, if no issues came up from my guiding 3 questions from my background check, then everything was good to go. Using this approach, we arrived at the current version of episode 1, which is also up in the structure side of my website, and this was going to be used for succeeding episodes. With that, we've reached the end of this video. Thank you for your time, and I am Riv or Spectre, and this is the production scope for FRAMEWALKER episode 1.